Before we start the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. It helps us create quality content for you. Help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Enjoy.
The sound of my phone ringing shattered the quiet hum of my office. I glanced at the screen, recognizing my daughter's name flashing across it. A tight knot formed in my stomach. She never called me during the workday unless something was wrong. I answered with a forced calmness that didn't match the rush of anxiety filling my chest. "Dad?" Her voice trembled on the other end. "There's a lady yelling at me at the bus stop." I gripped the phone tighter. "What happened? Are you okay?" "I don't know. She's yelling at me for no reason, Dad. She says I'm too close to her car and I don't know. I'm scared." Her voice cracked and I felt a surge of protective fury. "Where are you now?" I kept my voice steady, though inside I was already gearing up to leave. The thought of someone upsetting my child at all, let alone in such a small, vulnerable moment, filled me with rage. "The bus stop, like usual," she replied. "She's telling me to move away from her car or she'll call the police." I could hear her sniffle. I could feel the anger rising, flooding my veins. "Stay there, I'm coming." I hung up, the sharp click of the phone echoing in my ear as I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. My mind raced, a whirlwind of scenarios playing out before me. The idea that anyone could think they could intimidate my daughter like that, it didn't sit well with me. As I walked toward my car, I tried to steady my thoughts. It's just some overzealous neighbor, I told myself. Probably someone who thinks they can boss around the kids in the neighborhood. But even as I told myself that, I knew something felt wrong about this. I arrived at the bus stop a few minutes later. The quiet suburban street felt oppressive as I pulled into the parking lot near the corner. The bus was nowhere in sight, but my daughter stood by the curb, her back stiff as a woman in a cardigan and slacks towered over her, pointing a finger in my daughter's face. The woman's voice cut through the silence like a blade, sharp and condescending. "You heard me, little girl," she spat, her tone venomous. "Move away from my car, you're standing too close. Do you think this is a playground?" My daughter, normally confident, was visibly shrinking under the woman's barrage. She looked up at the woman with wide, pleading eyes, her hands clutching, her backpack tightly. My heart twisted, seeing my child caught in a situation she couldn't handle. I took a breath, reminding myself to stay calm. This would end soon. "Excuse me," I called, my voice carrying across the street. Both the woman and my daughter turned toward me. The woman's eyes narrowed when she saw me. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "This kid," the woman sneered, "was standing too close to my car." I told her to move, but she ignored me. "This is a problem, officer. I don't tolerate disrespect in my neighborhood." I blinked, momentarily confused. "Officer?" I glanced at the woman more carefully, noting the rigid stance, the deliberate way she kept her arms crossed over her chest, as though she were trying to assert some kind of dominance. Something about the way she spoke to me, like she expected me to fall in line behind her, struck a nerve. "I'm sorry, but I'm not sure what you're talking about," I replied. "Why don't you tell me what happened and we'll figure it out?" Her eyes flared with annoyance. "I'm talking about that brat standing too close to my car. She should know better. Kids these days have no respect." I could feel the heat rising in my chest. My daughter was no brat, and I wasn't about to let some stranger speak to her like that. "I'm her father," I said, stepping closer. "Now, if there's an issue, you can talk to me, but there's no need to be yelling at a child." The woman huffed, flicking her hair back. "Well, if you're going to be so defensive, maybe you should teach your daughter some respect instead of letting her run wild in my neighborhood." I was done trying to reason with her. "You don't get to talk to her like that," I said, stepping between the woman and my daughter, putting myself between them. I could feel my heart pounding, the desire to shield my child overpowering everything else. "You need to apologize and walk away before this gets any worse." The woman's eyes narrowed into a cold, calculating stare. "I'll call the HOA and you'll regret this, Chief. I don't care who you are. You'll be hearing from me." At the mention of the HOA, I felt the walls close in. It wasn't just a rude neighbor. It was someone who thought they could hide, behind their position in the homeowners association to intimidate others, someone who used their so-called power to push people around. I didn't flinch. "I'll tell you this once," I said, keeping my tone steady. "If you don't apologize to my daughter and leave, I'll make sure this situation is dealt with properly. And trust me, the last thing you want is to cross the line with me." She took a step back, her face reddening with rage, but she didn't move away from us. Instead, she stood there, glaring at me like she was daring me to make the first move. Silence between us was thick with tension. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about her harassing my child. It was about power, her trying to prove something by belittling a kid and pushing me to back down. "I don't care who you are," she muttered, spinning on her heel. "But I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are." I watched her storm off, a twisted smile playing on my lips. She had no idea who she was messing with. The game had just begun. The encounter at the bus stop left a sour taste in my mouth as I watched the woman storm off. I could feel my daughter's eyes on me, waiting for me to reassure her, to tell her everything was fine. But I couldn't bring myself to soften the moment. She had been wronged, and it stung deeper than I expected. The anger I had been holding back slowly began to burn in my chest as I watched the woman retreat down the street, her heels clicking on the pavement with a deliberate, mocking rhythm. "Are you okay?" I asked, turning toward my daughter. "I'm fine, Dad," she said, but her voice was small, and the tremor in her hands told me otherwise. She didn't even look me in the eye, too focused on the retreating figure of the woman who had just humiliated her. "That woman was completely out of line," I said quietly, placing a hand on her shoulder. I didn't care if she was embarrassed or felt silly. I needed her to understand the gravity of what had just happened. "She was so mean, Dad," my daughter whispered, her voice breaking. "I know, sweetie," I said, "but you did nothing wrong. People like her just—" I stopped myself. This wasn't the time to lecture. She needed to feel safe, to know this wasn't her fault. Just then, the bus pulled up, and the door swung open. We exchanged one last glance before she stepped onto the bus, her back to me as she found a seat. I watched the bus pull away, my mind racing. That woman was no ordinary neighbor. She was the kind of person who would stop at nothing to assert dominance, to make everyone around her feel small, like pawns in her game of self-importance. I knew the HOA would come into play sooner or later. They always did. But this was something deeper. This was personal. It wasn't about a lawn or a fence or a rule about how high your mailbox could be. This was about a woman who felt like she could walk all over people just because she had a little title attached to her name. I drove back home, the weight of the day sinking in as I parked in the driveway. I could feel the quiet settling over me, my anger simmering beneath the surface. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't let this slide. I couldn't just shrug it off and move on, not when my child had been treated like that. I entered the house and grabbed my phone from the kitchen counter. I had a few minutes before I needed to report into the station. The list of potential consequences for someone like her began to form in my mind. An HOA leader with a history of bullying, someone who thought she could control the neighborhood with her so-called influence. I wasn't just going to walk away from this. I scrolled through the contacts, landing on one name, Linda Hartman, a fellow officer and someone I trusted to handle things delicately. I sent her a quick message, asking if she knew anything about the woman at the bus stop. A few moments later, the reply pinged back. "Karen Green, runs the HOA, bit of a nightmare. Heard she's got a history of overstepping boundaries." I smiled coldly. So it was her. I had heard rumors about Karen Green before, but now I had confirmation. She wasn't just some overbearing neighbor. She had a reputation, and it was well known. I shot Linda another text. "I'm going to handle this." Linda's reply came fast. "Careful, she's got connections. Don't make it worse than it needs to be." I leaned back in the chair, considering her words. Of course Karen would have connections. People like her always did. They thrived on their ability to manipulate situations, to bend the rules until they broke, and to make people afraid of challenging them. But I wasn't scared. In fact, I was starting to feel the rush of anticipation, the itch to finally put an end to her act. It wasn't about power trips. It was about respect. And I wasn't going to let her think she could trample all over my family without consequences. Stood up, grabbing my jacket, and headed for the door. The plan was simple: gather information, gather evidence, and then figure out how to use it. I wasn't about to let Karen Green walk away from this unscathed, especially after what she had done to my daughter. The first stop was the local records office. I needed to see just how much influence Karen really had in this town to understand the full scope of her power. If I was going to deal with her, I needed to know how far she could reach, what she could do behind the scenes. As I walked through the doors of the office, the cool air inside did nothing to settle the heat that had been building all day. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Karen Green wasn't just a regular member of the HOA. She was at the very top. President, in fact. And that meant she had the kind of power that could sway everything in the neighborhood: property values, community rules, even the way people interacted with each other. She was a self-appointed queen, ruling over her domain with an iron fist and a high opinion of her own importance. I didn't know exactly what Karen thought she could do with that power, but I was starting to realize that she wasn't just some petty bully. She had an agenda. And I was going to make sure I found out exactly what it was. As I left the office, I could already feel the pieces falling into place. Karen thought she could intimidate people because she had a little title, a little control, but I had something she didn't: real power. And I was done letting her think she could walk all over my family. I dialed Linda's number, determined now more than ever. "Get ready," I said. "This is going to get interesting." The next few days felt like a game of chess. Each move calculated, each piece placed carefully. I spent my time gathering intel, learning everything I could about Karen Green and the power she wielded in the community. The more I dug, the more I realized that this wasn't just about my daughter anymore. It was about setting a precedent, about making sure people like Karen knew there were consequences for their actions. I wasn't just going to stand by while she bullied my family. Karen's influence over the HOA was undeniable. Her position as president gave her control over everything from neighborhood rules to which homes were being sold and for how much. People feared her, not because of what she could do physically, but because of what she could ruin with a simple word. The more I learned, the more I saw how much damage she could cause if unchecked. One evening, I sat in my car across from her, house watching as she came out to collect her mail. She was always so perfect, so composed, with her neatly pressed clothes and meticulously styled hair. She had the look of someone who thought the world owed her something. I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of disgust. I picked up my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found Linda's name. She had been the one to warn me about Karen's connections, but she also had something I needed: access to the right channels. I dialed and she answered on the first ring. "Hey, you got anything new?" I asked, my voice low but urgent. "I've been digging into Karen's finances," Linda said. "You're not going to like what I found. She's been funneling money from HOA fees into her own accounts for years, using her position to enrich herself while the neighborhood suffers. It's not a coincidence that the neighborhood has been declining under her leadership." I sat up straighter, the weight of the information sinking in. "So she's been skimming off the top. That's exactly the kind of thing I need to expose. What do we do with this?" Linda paused for a moment. "We make sure it gets to the right people. I've got a few contacts in local media. If we play our cards right, Karen won't just lose her HOA position, she'll lose everything." A small, bitter smile tugged at my lips. The plan was taking shape. Karen's arrogance had blinded her to the fact that there were people watching, people who saw her for what she truly was. It was time for her to face the consequences, to realize she wasn't as untouchable as she thought. The next few days were filled with late nights, phone calls, and exchanges of information. I made sure to keep everything as discreet as possible. Karen had no idea what was coming for her, and I wanted to keep it that way for as long as possible. Linda provided the final piece of the puzzle, a leaked email chain showing Karen's manipulation of the HOA's budget to funnel money into her own projects. It was the smoking gun I needed, the proof that would bring her down. I sat at my desk, staring at the email on my screen, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. This was it. I had everything I needed to expose her. I could already picture the look on her face when it all came crashing down around her. I took a deep breath and hit send, forwarding the information to my media contacts. It was a calculated risk. There was no going back once the story went public, but it was the only way to put a stop to her reign of terror. The media would eat it up. A corrupt HOA president? It was the kind of story that practically wrote itself. The following morning, I stood in front of my mirror preparing for the inevitable fallout. I knew Karen wouldn't go down without a fight. She would fight tooth and nail to keep her power. But the moment she realized the story had broken, it would be too late. I could already hear her scrambling, trying to spin the narrative in her favor, but the evidence was out there now. There was no escaping it. I grabbed my badge, slipping it into my jacket pocket, and headed out the door. The next few hours would be critical. Karen would likely try to control the situation, to hide behind her usual smug demeanor. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Not this time. I parked in front of her house again, my mind focused and ready for whatever came next. The sun was just starting to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the street. I could see Karen through her front window, pacing back and forth, probably already aware of the chaos unfolding around her. I walked up to her front door, knocking firmly. It only took a moment before the door swung open, revealing her standing in the doorway, eyes wide with the kind of panic I hadn't seen from her before. She was still trying to compose herself, but the cracks were already starting to show. "What's going on, Karen?" I asked, my tone calm, even though I could feel the tension building. "I just got a call from a few reporters who are asking about some very interesting financial activities you've been involved in." Her face went pale. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to sound confident. "I think you know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, stepping forward, my voice low but firm. "I've got everything I need to take you down, Karen. It's not a matter of if anymore, it's when." She recoiled slightly, taking a step back. "You can't do this. You have no idea what you're up against," she said, her voice almost pleading. "Now?" I stood there, watching her for a moment, savoring the moment where the power had shifted. "I think you overestimated how much power you really had," I said quietly, turning on my heel and walking away, leaving her standing there, her world crumbling around her. The game was over and Karen Green had lost. The following morning was like any other, but with a subtle tension hanging in the air, I could feel it pressing against my chest, as if the weight of what was about to unfold was a physical presence the media had already picked up on. Karen's name was spreading like wildfire, and I had no doubt she knew the walls were closing in. Her usual confident facade was nowhere to be found. I could only imagine the panic setting in, as she realized she was no longer the one pulling the strings, she was the one being played. I stood in front of my mirror again, staring at my reflection as if searching for something in the lines of my own face. I wasn't the same man who had stood here days ago questioning if I was doing the right thing. I had seen the truth about Karen and what she was capable of, and now I was ready to see it through no matter what it took. The phone rang as I grabbed my keys. Linda's voice crackled through the speaker, even before I said hello. "It's all over. The news," she said flatly. "She's already putting up a fight, but she doesn't have a leg to stand on. The stories out there, the evidence is clear." "Good," I said with a tight smile. "It's only a matter of time now." I hung up and walked out the door, my pulse racing with anticipation as I drove toward Karen's house, my eyes scanning the streets as if expecting something or someone to appear, but everything was eerily calm. When I arrived at her house, it was clear the atmosphere had shifted. The air felt charged. The front door was wide open and there was movement inside. I approached slowly, watching her through the window as she paced back and forth. The tension in her every step betrayed her facade of control. She wasn't the unshakable woman who had humiliated my daughter at the bus stop, She was just a woman terrified of losing everything she had worked so hard to manipulate into existence. I knocked on her door this time. There was no hesitation, no fear, just the need to confront her face to face, and when she opened the door there was no smug smile, no cold greeting, only a look of wide-eyed panic. Her usual composure had completely crumbled. "Karen," I said, my voice steady calm. "You thought you could control this neighborhood with lies and fear, but now it's over. You can't escape it." She stood frozen for a moment, her chest rising and falling rapidly, as if trying to gather herself before she spoke. Her voice wavered more than I had ever heard it. "You don't understand," she said, almost pleading. "This isn't just about me, this is about everything I've built, everything I've done for this place." "You built it on lies and manipulation," I replied with a cold edge. "You used your power to control people, to take what wasn't yours and hurt anyone who got in your way." I stepped closer now, my presence undeniable. "You didn't care who you destroyed as long as you got what you wanted." She stepped back into her house as if trying to create space between us, but there was no escaping the truth that had caught up to her. Her world was unraveling faster than she could keep up with, and I could see the realization dawning in her eyes that this wasn't going to go away. I didn't have a choice. She whispered almost to herself, "You don't know what it's like to have everything slip through your fingers, to feel like you have to fight for every inch." I stood silent for a moment, allowing her words to hang in the air, the weight of them almost making me feel sorry for her. But I quickly reminded myself of who she was, who she had become, the woman who had no problem using others for her own gain. "You made those choices," I said, finally, "and now you have to face the consequences." Her face twisted in desperation as she looked at me, her voice sharp and frantic. "You think you've won, don't you? You think this is over, but you have no idea what you're up against. I will destroy you just like I destroyed everyone who ever tried to challenge me." There it was, the same arrogance that had driven her all this time, the belief that she could manipulate her way out of anything. But this time she was wrong. She had no more cards to play, and I wasn't backing down. "I'm not afraid of you," I said simply, my tone unshakable. For a moment Karen just stared at me as if unsure what to do next. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, I heard a car pull up outside the driveway. It was Linda and a few other officers I had called in, just in case the situation escalated. I knew Karen wouldn't go down without a fight, but I was ready to see this through. Linda stepped onto the porch first, her presence solid and commanding. She walked past me with a nod before facing Karen directly. "It's over, Karen," she said firmly. "You're under arrest for embezzlement and corruption." Karen's eyes flickered between us, her face drained of color as the realization hit her like a freight train. She had no more tricks left, no more lies to hide behind. The moment had come and gone, and she was trapped in the very web she had spun herself. "You can't do this," she stammered. But the defiance was gone, replaced by sheer panic. "Your actions have consequences, Karen," I said, my voice filled with finality. "You've hurt too many people for far too long, and now you'll pay for it." The officers moved forward, placing her hands behind her back as she struggled and screamed, her anger now directed at the very people who had once feared her, as they led her away. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction wash over me. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about showing my daughter that no one was above the law, that no one could get away with bullying others without facing the music. I watched as the car pulled away, my heart still pounding, but in a way that felt good. That felt right. For the first time in days, I took a deep breath and smiled, knowing the neighborhood would finally have the peace it deserved. Karen Green was no longer the queen of this broken kingdom, and her reign had ended in the most fitting way possible.